An epic meltdown from the ex-president this afternoon, speaking with 3 journalists at the National Association of Black Journalists Conference in Chicago. A conversation that imploded right before our very eyes on live TV, essentially right out of the gates. Trump immediately breaking into a tirade against the first moderator, Rachel Scott of ABC News, who asked him about his past comments on race. And then Trump questioned Vice President Kamala Harris's racial identity. Take a listen.
Some of your own supporters, including Republicans on Capitol Hill, have labeled Vice President Kamala Harris, who is the first Black and Asian American woman to serve as vice president and be on a major party ticket, as a DEI hire. Is that acceptable language to you? And will you tell those Republicans and those supporters to stop it?
How do you define DEI? Go ahead. How do you define
diversity, equity, inclusion?
Okay, yeah, go ahead. Is that what your definition?
That is
give me a
literally
definition
the words
then. Would you give me a definition
DEI.
of that? Give me a definition.
Sir,
of
I'm
that.
asking you a question,
No,
a
you
very
have to
direct
define
question.
It. Define it for me, if you would.
I just defined it, sir. Do you believe that Vice President Kamala Harris is only on the ticket because she is a Black woman?
Well, I can say no. I think it's maybe a little bit different. So, I've known her a long time indirectly, not directly, very much, and she was always of Indian heritage, and she was only promoting Indian heritage. I didn't know she was Black until a number of years ago when she happened to turn Black, and now she wants to be known as Black. So I don't know, is she Indian or is she Black?
She has always identified as a Black woman.
I respect
she went to a historically Black college.
I respect either one, but she obviously doesn't, because she was Indian all the way, and then all of a sudden she made a turn, and she became a Black person.
Just to be clear, sir, do you believe that she is...
I think somebody should look into that, too, when you continue in a very hostile, nasty tone.
It's a direct question, sir. Do you believe that Vice President Kamala Harris is a DEI hire, as some Republicans have said?
I really don't know. I mean, I really don't know. Could be.
It's amazing he's gotten away with that for as long as he has. But it appears to be over. The 35-minute conversation was like that basically throughout. It remained contentious. Trump even defended his Black jobs comment in a room full of Black journalists.
I will tell you that coming from the border are millions and millions of people that happen to be taking Black jobs. You had the best.
What exactly is a Black job, sir?
A Black job is anybody that has a job. That's what it is. Anybody that has a job.
All right.
Vice President Kamala Harris's response to all of this: absolute disaster for Donald Trump. This is who he is. A source close to Vice President Harris tells NBC News in response to Trump's claim that she, quote, became Black, quote, "It is simply a lie and easily disproved. She went to Howard, for Christ's sake. She's an AKA," referring, of course, to the historically African-American sorority Alpha Kappa Alpha. White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre was in the middle of her briefing when Trump's comments were taking place. She first laughed in shock and then said this.
As a person of color, as a Black woman who is in this position that is standing before you at this podium behind this lectern, what he just said, what you just read out to me, is repulsive, it's insulting, and, you know, no one has any right to tell someone who they are, how they identify. That is no one's right. It is someone's own decisions. It is, I'll add this. Only she can speak to her experience. Only she can speak to what it's like. She's the only person that can do that. And I think it's insulting for anybody. It doesn't matter if it's a former leader, a former president. It is insulting. And we have to put, she is the Vice President of the United States, Kamala Harris. We have to put some respect on her name.
Before we start today with some of our favorite experts and friends, the Reverend Al Sharpton joins us. He hosts Politics Nation right here on MSNBC. He's also the president of the National Action Network. With me at the table, former senator and co-host of MSNBC's How to Win 2024 podcast. Our friend Claire McCaskill's here. Also joining us, NBC News correspondent Yamiche Alcindor. She was at the convention in Chicago watching Trump's appearance as it took place. She's also our correspondent on the Harris campaign. Yamiche, let me start with you. Just go through, I don't even know how you rank the offenses, not just to the people in the room, but to everybody. But take a stab at it for us.
Well, I think this was really a remarkable moment in what has been a remarkable campaign season. To see former President Trump in front of a group of Black journalists who invited him to answer questions about policy, about his views on the campaign trail, about his views about America and his vision for the future, and to have him go after Vice President Harris in this way that is really questioning her identity, questioning her authenticity, was really something to behold. And I think as someone who's covering the Harris campaign and who has covered, frankly, the vice president when she was a senator way back, more than a decade now, I've been following her work and interviewing her. It's very clear that she's been very pointed and also very articulate when it comes to talking about her background, talking about what she got from her mother and her father being a Black man who was of Jamaican descent, her mother being someone who was Indian. She talks about how that background and her parents meeting as civil rights activists, taking her to protest in a stroller, that she had her identity really very clearly understood her identity as from when she was a little girl. So to hear him say that she had been claiming to be only Indian and only now is talking about being African American is just frankly not true, Nicole. She went to a historically Black college. She pledged and joined a historically Black sorority, Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated, the first historically African American sorority founded in this country. And she's time and time again throughout her career talked about the importance of racial justice and tying it back to her own identity. So this really is something that I think is it is really hard to fathom that former President Trump thought that this insult, this attack was going to land. It just doesn't make sense to even say this. And in talking to people, you read some of the reporting that I got. I was sitting in the room and people were stunned, right? I'm going to take you a little bit behind the scenes. People were stunned. People were gasping. There were some people who were shouting back at him, saying, that's a lie. So the room, the atmosphere, I think, was already sort of tense because this is a president that has attacked a number of National Association Black journalists. There was a lot of questions whether or not he should be invited. Everyone had different opinions. But when he started sort of talking about her race, it really just I think really made the room feel very much like this is a palpable anger from some people. And again, journalists, we're covering him objectively, we're covering him fairly. But I think when you start to say things that are just simply not true and going after someone's Blackness, it really hurts. And I want to just read to you some of the things that I got when I was texting Harris sources. One person said he's completely unhinged. This is Trump. He cannot help himself. As you said, someone else says this completely insulting and repulsive. Exactly what Karine Jean-Pierre said from the podium. Someone else said it's simply a lie, easily disproven. She went to Howard for Christ's sake. Another person said this is painful, and I think painful might be something that Reverend Sharpton can talk about because there's a whole history of Black people having to deal with discrimination and having to deal with people taking their lives for their race and who they are. And Vice President Harris has really found herself in the lineage of that. Let's also talk about the fact that she was at the in Selma, Alabama, at the Edmund Pettus Bridge, talking about racial justice, and to have this there can be policy differences, right? You can have policy differences. You can have different visions for the world. But this attack was just something that was, I think, that was really a low bar, even for former President Trump, who has gone very much a low bar, gone very much underground in some of the comments he's made about different people.
That was Vice President Kamala Harris addressing the convention of Sigma Gamma Rho Society Incorporated in Houston, Texas. Still with me, Stuart Stevens, Senior Advisor for the Lincoln Project, Valencia Johnson, Democratic strategist, and Kadia Goba, reporter for Semaphore, who interviewed Donald Trump today at the NABJ conference. So that to be honest, I thought she'd have a little bit more fun and lean into that conversation that you had today, Khadija, with Donald Trump. But I think what we saw was her sort of making a note of it, and not having that frame how she wants to run this campaign and how she wants to be as president. How did you read what she said there, just overall, and how she's framing herself as you have others out there, particularly, at other media outlets, trying to define her a certain way, DEI, candidate, for example?
Yeah, I know you raised a good point. I think she was very careful about how she characterized that the incident or the interview earlier today, but she brought it up, and
right.
I think
Bring
that.
it up.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like Donald Trump just gave her, a whole new ad campaign that she could possibly run on in the future. But she was, respectful about it, didn't dig too hard. But she said, her framing was, this is what you can expect, right? He hasn't changed. And like I said, he just kind of gave her that. So one of the first things I was thinking about when this was happening, I was like, oh, well, this is a great opportunity for his opponent to really highlight that. But also she talked on all the other hit on all the other points. I was surprised she didn't do the offense on immigration, but she brought up abortion, reminding people this guy said that he would, promise to put judges in, and this is what he did, and then pivoted on to what we now see as the rollback of Roe versus Wade.
Alyncia, for Democrats, this is 180 degrees from where you were 4 weeks ago. There's no doubt about that. The energy is different. The mood of the country about the presidential campaign has changed. What have you seen that translates for you into the possibilities this fall for winning this election, holding the House, maybe gaining additional seats there, and maybe even keeping the Senate in viable play, given the way the Harris campaign has really come out of the blocks and has taken moments like this and has galvanized, not just those interests within the Democratic Party, those who are already Democrats support the party, et cetera, but a lot of folks that Stuart and I know, center-right independent voters, center-right Republicans, who are looking now and taking another look.
Listen, I think since Vice President Harris has become the presumptive nominee, we still have to go through convention and her accept the nomination. The path to our victory has opened up quite a bit more, right? I think the reality is in this race, we already knew what we were voting against, right? The past, I would say the 1700s form of ideology that the Republican Party is running on. We knew what we were voting against. We knew that they overturned these rights for women, for Black people, for anybody who was not white male benefiting from nepotism. But she is symbolizing now the hope for the future. We can see hope for the future. I want to be very clear that this engagement at Sigma Gamma Rho Sorority Incorporated, their conference, I am a member of the Divine Nine. I'm a member of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. This was actually already planned. She was actually going to speak to the sororities in the Divine Nine this summer because, as many people know, and maybe some viewers don't understand, these organizations are anchors in Black communities, and there are hundreds of thousands of members. We're already actually excited about her. Now there's even more energy now that she's the presumptive nominee, and they are even more galvanized to go out and make sure they expand the electorate. Since she was announced, as her candidacy was announced last week, we see more young people who are engaged. The numbers are moving in our favor. You all have reported extensively on the different coalitions that have organically come up across Zoom, right, from Black women and women with black women, all the way to white dudes for Kamala Harris this week that raised $4 million. And that coalition is going to continue to expand, and it's going to include a lot of factions of the party, from the moderates, the never Trumpers, to also the progressives and young people and everyone in between.
Stuart, our friend Tim Miller put out a tweet while watching what was happening on the stage there at the NABJ interview. And he said, this interview was an example of why the people who demand that we deplatform Trump are wrong. People should see this. A grumpy, cruel, hard-of-hearing, race-baiting a-hole having to actually answer for his track record in an environment outside of his comfort zone. I happen to agree 1,000% with that view. I know, if I recall, I think you do too. The more the public sees and hears Donald Trump, in many cases, he makes the case against himself.
Yeah, I think what's different about this than flashing back to 2016, where you're just throwing up Trump rallies. This is different. He's on stage with 3 journalists who are challenging him, who are asking him tough questions. Trump, he doesn't like women. He is terrified of black women. He sees much of what has happened to him as a result of black women, and he refuses to take responsibility for anything. You know, if you were working for the Donald Trump campaign, when you were watching this, it was like watching a baby crawl across the interstate at night. You just couldn't look, and they couldn't get him off that stage fast enough. And, you know, this is a long campaign. You can't hide Donald Trump. And what's happened is, you know, I've seen this before in campaigns. When campaigns, a candidate thinks they're going to win, and then that gets pulled back from them. That can be a devastating moment for them. And very few candidates have the emotional maturity to deal with that well. They have to adjust and they have to come back. I don't think Donald Trump has the ability to adjust here. I think this is the Donald Trump, the angry Donald Trump, embittered, you owe me, why are you stopping me from what is my rightful, I already am president of the United States, people just don't realize it. And I think it's extraordinarily unattractive to most Americans.
The latest Bloomberg Morning Consult poll shows Vice President Kamala Harris leading Donald Trump by 1 point, which is within the margin of error among crucial swing state voters. So what are we to make of the 2 dueling campaign strategies we saw play out today, with Donald Trump speaking to the National Association of Black Journalists and Vice President Kamala Harris addressing Sigma Gamma Rho sorority, one of the country's 9 most prominent black fraternities and sororities that make up what is known as the Divine Nine. Joining me now is Faz Shakir, the campaign manager for Bernie Sanders' 2020 presidential campaign and founder and executive director of More Perfect Union. Faz, thank you for being with me. I think today was such an interesting case study in how these 2 campaigns are operating. And I wonder what you make of the Trump strategy to go to a high-profile conference, take a Q&A session, and the Harris campaign saying nothing of the editorial that emerged from it. And the Harris strategy to go down and talk directly with, you know, a network of black sorority women and organizers, for lack of a better term, who have a proven historical record of mobilizing voters in previous election cycles.
Yeah, Kamala Harris is consolidating the Democratic base, firing people up, and spending her time to jump from event to event right now. And next week, I think she's going to 7 battleground states in the course of a few days. So she's on fire, and she's trying to build that energy. Trump, I think Yamiche mentioned it in the prior segment, I think she was right on, that he wants to get the mic back in his hands. And one of the classic tactics of Trump that we've known forever is that he psychologically trolls his opponent when he feels like the mic has left his hands. So here comes Bird Brain Haley, and here comes Ron DeSanctimonious, and attacks on Jeb Bush that you remember, and Marco Rubio, small hands, and all kinds of things that he has laid at the feet of all of his prior people just to try to psychologically troll them and control the narrative back over to him. And quite frankly, what it does is try to distract the opponent from talking about the things that they want to talk about. You saw on Vice President Harris tonight, she's not going to get distracted by it. I think people just want to see the jab at Trump, but say, I know the messages that are going to work. The 2 words that we've seen from her over and over, Alex, are freedom, which is the freedom to control your own body, freedom to thrive in this economy, and prosecutor. I'm a tough prosecutor who's going to bring accountability to this government and make things happen for you, that's working for her. And the more she does that and introduces herself to a lot of people who are going to come online at post-Labor Day as low-propensity voters and dial into this race for the first time, that's what they need to hear from her.
Yeah, and just as an organizing strategy, it looks pretty clearly, and Tim Alberta has done some great reporting on this at The Atlantic, that the Trump campaign is not interested in grassroots door knocking. They're not interested in the sort of shoe leather campaigning. That doesn't feel like the strategy that the Democrats are pursuing, right? I mean, This is like an established network of people who are, already in community with one another and talking to one another in a very real grassroots fashion, as opposed to kind of making hay among, an assembled group of black journalists that don't have any particular connection to Trump or his campaign.
I am confident, and you're seeing the enthusiasm already, that the Democrats will have a strong grassroots game in all the core battleground states and beyond to turn out the vote. But I will caution this, because you mentioned this about Trump. And yes, he has a different tactic. He always has. He relies more on social media, not the classic organizing. We now hear from the New York Times that there's a super PAC coming online to try to fill in the gaps for him to do some of this organizing. Here's the caution, though, and I want all our Democratic friends to hear this. Donald Trump has been in 2 presidential elections, 2016, 2020. In each of them, he outperformed the number of votes that people thought he was going to get heading into Election Day. So we shouldn't fool ourselves into thinking that somehow because he's not investing in certain things that we are investing in, that people aren't going to turn out. He's got a high level of loyalty there. These rallies and the crowds that he generates are organizing strategies for them. And I would go into Election Day assuming that whatever the polls are, he's going to outperform them, because that has been the track record. It just means, just like in 2020, our outperformance, our voter turnout is just going to swamp his, and hopefully we crush him.
It's an important cautionary note to sound, Faz, just because we also have reporting from Nate Silver at the New York Times suggesting she is a favorite right now to win the popular vote. But Trump still has a lead on the Electoral College. And that is the reality of getting elected in the U.S. presidency. You got to win the Electoral College. So what would your advice be to people who are looking at the Harris strategy and trying to turn the momentum into real practical victory?
Again, I offer this just as a caution, Alex, which is that they've run in 2 presidential elections. They know their voters. That's a huge advantage for Trump. They know who voted over the 16 and 20. We don't know necessarily exactly all the voter universe for Harris. I think it could be larger, right? If you look at Obama in 08, it could be larger if young people turn out in large numbers. But it means that the work for us is that much harder to make sure we're trying to reach out beyond what might have been the Biden turnout vote. And try to talk to people and not assume that we already know where they're at, because Harris could turn and move persuasion in one way, and it also could, quite frankly, move in the other way, but it's going to require that organizing person to person.
Faz Shakir, always good to talk to you, my friend. Thanks for being here tonight.
You know how I know that Donald Trump is lying when he says that he knows nothing about Project 2025? The mastermind of Project 2025 is leaving his job after being pressured to quit by the Trump campaign. But while Trump plays dumb, distancing himself from the 952-page manifesto and the people behind it, his running mate is showing just how fully on board he is with it. Senator J.D. Vance wrote the foreword for an upcoming book by the leader of the parent organization of Project 2025, Heritage Foundation President Kevin Roberts. In it, Vance writes, quote, "We are now all realizing that it's time to circle the wagons and load the muskets. In the fights that lay ahead, these ideas are an essential weapon," unquote. It is abundantly clear why the Trump campaign wants to run away from Project 2025, because it's terrible and wildly unpopular and dangerous and weird, like their plans to deal with the climate crisis and the environment. Last week, the Earth experienced the 4 hottest days ever on the heels of 13 months of unprecedented global high temperatures. Project 2025 would further harm the planet while rewarding corporate polluters and the fossil fuel industry at our expense. Project 2025 plans to make our air and water dirtier by limiting the Environmental Protection Agency's ability to combat pollution and eliminating limits on forever chemicals in drinking water. It calls for withdrawing from the Paris Climate Agreement, gutting clean energy programs, and repealing President Biden's Inflation Reduction Act and its investments in renewable energy. But what they really want to do is drill, baby, drill, and give oil and gas companies access to more public lands and waters, making them even richer and many of us sicker. Joining me now is Jamie Henn, founder and director of Fossil Free Media, a nonprofit that supports putting an end to fossil fuels and addressing the climate crisis. Jamie, I have pointed out some of the egregious things in their climate plan. What are some of the things that really scare you the most?
Well, Joy, thanks for having me. Look, Project 2025 is the greatest assault on our environmental and public health protections that we've seen in a generation. You know, as you said, this plan takes a chainsaw to a lot of the basic protections that I think Americans have come to rely on. You know, when we turn on the tap, we expect there to be clean drinking water. Project 2025 would dismantle the Office of Law Enforcement at the EPA's Water Division so that polluters would be free to put whatever chemicals they want into our drinking supply. We expect to breathe clean air. Project 2025 guts the ability of the EPA to regulate pollution from power plants and cars, making the air unsafe to breathe and our kids even sicker. We expect to eat healthy food. We hope that chemicals aren't in there. As you said, Project 2025 aims to undo the progress that the Biden-Harris administration has made on PFAS and aims to reclassify tens of thousands of other toxic substances that big polluters want to keep using at the expense of our health. And finally, you know, I work on climate and I have a 3-year-old daughter. I worry about her future. Project 2025 would undo all of the progress that we've made over the last 4 years on climate, putting all of our families at risk. I think environmental protections can feel like a nice to have sometimes, but this is really about our health, our bodies, our kids. All of that is at stake in this election, and this plan takes direct aim at those protections.
Yeah, I mean, I lived in Florida for 14 years. You know, if you get rid of NOAA, people are going to die. If there's no predictability of storms that are coming, that's life-saving for people in Florida, Texas, Mississippi, Louisiana, places where storms can literally kill you. I grew up in Colorado, tornadoes. You know, if you're literally taking away the agency that at least warns people this stuff is coming, people are going to die. Let me read you a couple of the quotes from Project 2025. Quote, the Biden administration's climate fanaticism will need a whole of government unwinding. Here's another one. The federal government has an obligation to develop the vast oil, gas, and coal resources for which it is responsible. I'll just do one more. Eliminating the standalone Office of Environmental Justice and External Civil Rights at the EPA. That is the office that focuses on how race and income affects access to clean air, land, and water. It addresses things like the existence of Louisiana's Cancer Alley. So basically, they're also going to remove any chance of knowing which communities are being poisoned first and most.
Yeah, let's break down each of those because they're great examples of what this project aims to do. The last one you mentioned is really key. We know that Black, Brown, Indigenous communities in this country bear the brunt of fossil fuel industry pollution and climate impacts. The Trump Project 2025 plan aims to strip all of that from the EPA so that we can't even use any of those indicators to go look at a community like Cancer Alley and figure out what's going on and how we protect people in harm's way. The other part you mentioned is to borrow a phrase, the really weird part, right? They want to privatize the National Weather Service because some of Trump's donors have big stakes in weather companies. That means that if you're in the path of a hurricane, you know, you're going to have to pay to get information if you should leave your house, or you're going to rely on Trump and his Sharpie to figure out if you need to evacuate. They want to eliminate NOAA, as you mentioned, mostly because that's the agency that does some of the best climate science research in this country. So this plan really goes after our agencies, both with a sledgehammer, but also a scalpel, going through every last little division to try and strip out any mention of environmental justice and any mention of climate. But I think it's even worse than that, because as you say, this isn't just about dismantling agencies. It's about turning them into wholly owned subsidiaries of the fossil fuel industry. I mean, EPA becomes the Environmental Polluters Agency. It works on behalf of big oil and gas under this plan. Bureau of Land Management becomes prospectors for oil and gas companies so that they can drill on our public lands and in our state parks. This is a truly radical version of this sort of policy and a completely dangerous plan that will really impact every American that lives in this country.
No wonder Donald Trump is going to the oil and gas billionaires and saying, give me $1 billion, because he's going to do their bidding. Jamie Henn, thank you so much. Please come back. This was very important information. And for more, thank you. And for more of our segments on Project 2025 and how it promises to upend our republic, you can go to msnbc.com/readout Project 2025.
Whoa, baby, what a difference a month makes for Democrats. Take a look at the front page of the New York Times 4 weeks ago today. The top story all about how some in the party were worried about President Biden's mental state after the debate with Trump. And here's the New York Times today. I'm going to quote it. Everything is different now for Democrats. Their crowds are dancing. Beyonce has conquered the soundtrack. The celebrities from Southern rappers to Hollywood actors are showing up. The headline of that story sums up the question on everybody's mind. How long can Democrats ride this incredible wave of new energy? Well, this evening, I'm glad to welcome someone who knows the likely nominee, Vice President Harris, very, very well. Democratic Senator Cory Booker of the greatest state in the nation, New Jersey. Senator, it is always good to see you. We have so much to talk about, but I want to start with something pretty serious. I want to get your response, your reaction to what former President Donald Trump said about Vice President Harris's race today at the NABJ event, and really how he's responded since then.
Look, I think that this is a standard playbook for Donald Trump to try to deflect and divide. He brings up things that he knows will be considered outrageous by people on our side of the aisle. And all we want to do now is talk about that. And this is really his ability to deflect from what the real issues of this election are and try to divide our country against itself and opportunistically capitalize on that. Think about this for a second. We are talking about whether a black woman is black. And all these people are rushing to say, oh, she was an AKA and she went to a historically black college. Enough of that. Let's talk about the economy. Let's talk about health care. Donald Trump doesn't want to talk about that. He doesn't want to talk about his ripping away of a woman to control her own body and make her own health care decisions. He doesn't want to talk about the fact that he blew one of the biggest deficits in our budget that we've ever seen in my lifetime, all to give overwhelmingly tax cuts to the wealthiest there are, and not middle-class tax cuts the way they could be and as they were under Harris and Biden with the child tax credit. He does not want to talk about the issues. So what does he do? What he's done for his entire times aspiring to get into politics. Talk about birtherism and the outrageous claim that Barack Obama wasn't born in the United States and have us running around talking about that and trying to prove it. Talk about the Central Park Five when he was irrelevant and getting his name into the New York Times. This is what he does. This is supposed to bring our country together for common aspiration and common purpose and really the sense of common cause. He divides us against each other using racial tropes as his tool. I've seen this in the Republican Party too much.
Then do you think this election is going to be, you said the most important issues of the election, you brought up policy, and there's lots of questions. What is Kamala Harris's policy going to be on X or Y? Is this election going to be about policy? Because Donald Trump, to the point you just made, never covers that.
No, and he's going to do his best. And I've seen this playbook. You want to talk about DEI, CRT, whatever letters they can bring up that are about dividing America along racial lines, religious or gender. I want our party, and I know what Kamala Harris wants to talk about, is the economy. Which administration, Trump or Biden-Harris, created more jobs? Which created more manufacturing jobs? Even look at something like the stock market and how corporations and businesses did. In fact, I know this has been more black business new starts as well as overall business entrepreneurial new starts in the last year to 2 years than in any 1 to 2 year period before in the last 25 years. This is an administration under Biden-Harris that has a record to run on in terms of our economy, in terms of lowering the costs of prescription drugs. Trump talked about it. Biden-Harris lowered the cost of insulin. Infrastructure Week here in Jersey, as you are, the biggest infrastructure investments ever made in the history of our state in the New York, New Jersey region. Donald Trump had Infrastructure Week, but Biden-Harris actually got some investments done. This is
Senator,
about the future.
I have to correct you. I have to correct you. Donald Trump had 8 infrastructure weeks. He did not have 1. He had 8. What do you say to those who look at this incredible buzz around the vice president, around this campaign, who are wondering how it happened? Some are even doubting that this enthusiasm, this fundraising, some don't even believe it's real. What do you say about the excitement to them?
Well, look, I say, in God we trust, but everybody else bring me data. I look at the data points. I'm just coming from campaigning in Nevada, where they've had a tidal wave of people signing up to volunteer over these last 95 days of the campaign. In fact, they're having record-breaking people signing up to make phone calls, to knock on doors, to write postcards. I look at the money coming in. That's real dollars and cents that you can measure, and they have broken records, not just for Democratic presidential nominees or Republican nominees, all presidential nominees in all of time. They have created a record now for a one-week haul. This is an extraordinarily exciting time, and this momentum is going to continue. And Donald Trump doesn't know what to do, so he falls back on his old playbook when he started his last campaign, casting aspersions that were outrageous about saying that people who come across the border are rapists and murderers. And that made everybody want to talk about that as opposed to real policy. Donald Trump is going to continue his old-fashioned playbook of saying outrageous, divisive things to deflect from the core issues of middle-class families, which should unite us. What should we be talking about today? The fact that the United Auto Workers, my grandfather got out of poverty because of the UAW jobs. They have endorsed Kamala Harris, one of the most important working class unions that there are. These are the real issues and the building blocks that build for a winning campaign in places like Michigan. Donald Trump doesn't want to talk about that. He wants to divide us along racial lines, divide us along gender lines, as opposed to what we need to do as a country right now is forget the tribalism, forget the divisiveness, but unite as a nation around our common cause and common purpose.
Well, perhaps that's why he's chosen J.D. Vance, who shares in the spreading outrageous ideas and divisiveness. And I want to talk about the child tax credit, because Senator Schumer is putting the bipartisan child tax credit expansion up for a vote tomorrow. And there's actually some Senate Republicans who want to block this thing. I'm confused by it. You work in the Senate, so I need an explanation. J.D. Vance has made it very clear Republicans are the pro-family party. Right? His whole brand is family, family, family. But on top of that, it seems like he might not even be able to cast a vote because he's going to be campaigning in Arizona tomorrow. Can you explain this to me? Pro-family and expanding the child tax credit should be hand in hand.
Yeah, under Biden, we got it for 1 year. We were one vote shy. One Republican could have joined us to extend the largest middle-class tax cut. Over 85% of New Jerseyans got this tax cut, the expansion of the child tax credit. It cut child poverty in our country in half and brought children below the poverty line above. And by the way, their outcomes explode when you get children above the poverty line in terms of lifetime earnings and other positive outcomes. If you are pro-family, you would be there to vote for this bipartisan bill. And I'll tell you more than that. Donald Trump did not have the kind of bipartisan successes that Biden and Harris have on the first gun legislation in over 20 years, Bipartisan Infrastructure Act, Bipartisan CHIPS Act. This is a presidency and a vice presidency have joined together to do positive things. And what frustrates me is that these pro-family folks won't join Democrats in pushing paid family leave, in pushing for maternal care. We have the highest maternal mortality rate, in pushing the kind of policies that strengthen families at the kitchen table, strengthen families who want to raise children. And we have got to start talking about those things as plainly as we have. And who is fighting for American families, who is fighting for safe childbirth, who is fighting for these kind of basic freedoms in our country, and who's making it more expensive for families, more difficult for families, harder to find affordable child care, harder to have paid family leave. And that's folks like J.D. Vance. Look at their voting records.
This is an interesting case because in Arizona, the statewide victory of the Democratic candidates in the last election depended in some case on the fact that there were Republicans who feel that your state has a rich history of conservatism, and these quacks are not it.
Unfortunately, they are not it. However, this is what we are fighting, and we have to be ready. This is why Democrats have to step up. This is why we have to defeat election deniers like Kari Lake. And if you want to join me in doing that, please go to Gallego for Arizona to help us. We're going to need every bit of help. But we are losing honorable men and women, Republicans in the Reagan conservative nature, because they're standing up for democracy. Stephen Richer is a neighbor of mine. Literally, he is my neighbor. We have dinner together. We have drinks together. Our families know each other. And even though, he and I will disagree almost 90% of the time, at the core, we agree on one thing, that we love our democracy and we'll do anything to defend it. And it's scary that we are running away from the McCain veterans, the veterans that have been fighting to save this country for so long, and running to the election deniers that we see, such as in the vein of Kari Lake.
So now tell me about that. Show me what that path looks like to victory for you and those who want to keep going with this republic that we've got in the United States for November. Because on one hand, it's a big flashing red light how many votes the Republican victors like Kari Lake got last night. On the other hand, it does alienate those McCain Republicans. It does alienate mainstream conservatives. It does alienate a whole lot of people who were talked about in those Trump indictments, who are Republicans who said, I'm not going to go against the Constitution of the United States for you, Donald Trump.
Look, the way it looks like is I go and I talk to everybody. I've been traveling this state for 18 months, going to some of the reddest parts of the state, talking to veterans, talking about how we had an oath and did an oath to protect the Constitution of the United States. I'm very proud that I'm a Iraq combat veteran. And like many other veterans in this country, independents, Republicans, we care first about defending our republic and defending the Constitution of the United States. And then we worry about the politics. And I think a lot of them, and from talking to them, they are stepping up with me. They're going to say that we're going to defend this republic and defend democracy, and we're going to do it at the ballot box. Once we start with that base, then we're going out even further. We're talking to people that feel that they've been left out from the Republican Party. You know, you're going to be talking to Mayor Giles next pretty soon. That's a perfect example of a conservative Republican mayor who has done everything he can for his community, and yet his own party has pushed him out. We are talking to them on the fact that we are the party that is willing to bring them in, have a big tent, and really fight for a future of Arizona. You're not going to get that from the Kari Lake campaign. All she has is divisiveness, anger, and not an ability to even unify her party, let alone the whole state.
Let's talk about the presidential race. In Arizona, you've got this existential issue of democracy and believing in elections. You can sort of combine that with the abortion issue because it is related to our personal freedoms.
It's freedom, absolutely,
right.
Yes.
On the other hand, you've got Kamala Harris, who is talking about a future and not looking back. It's sort of a different vein of campaign, and it seems to be working. It's positive. It's very future-oriented. What's going to play in Arizona?
Look, Arizona is an aspirational state. People move here to continue their lives, to grow, to buy a house, start their families, study, start businesses. This state is doing the gangbusters when it comes to business startups. We have the lowest unemployment in the history of the country. So looking forward, but recognizing that we have challenges really matters. And this is why it's important that we talk about what we're going to do, not just who you should hate. We're going to talk about how we're going to work together, not how you're going to divide us, which is what you get from people like Kari Lake. We're going to talk about the successes we had with the CHIPS Act, where we're actually bringing in some of the most high-tech jobs that this country has seen, and they're all happening here in Arizona. So that is what it's going to happen. If you go and talk to Latinos, a very big growing population in this state. I just had a great event, Juntos con Gallego, and we talked about the American dream and how you could acquire that American dream here in the United States, but you need to have someone that actually believes in you. And we are the people. I am that campaign that actually believes not just in Latinos being able to accomplish the American dream, but any Arizonan, as long as they're willing to put their gut into it and their fight into it.
The border issue is a real issue for Arizonans. Talk to me about that. It is a attack line that Republicans are using with Kamala Harris. Talk to me about how you approach it in your state.
Well, look, the way I approach it is the same thing I've been doing. I've been going and talking to our border mayors, border sheriffs, border county officials, talking to border patrols. As a matter of fact, I actually met with Border Patrol Union this morning down in Yuma, Arizona. And we've been sitting down listening for quite a while, and also providing the resources they need in order for them to try to control that border. To our mayors and sheriffs and first responders, for them to not be overwhelmed by the broken immigration system. Which remind people that we want a border solution, right? And there was a border solution that was negotiated between Democrats and Republicans. And cynical politicians like Kari Lake said, without reading that bill, to reject it. Why? Not because there's a better solution, but it was a better political outcome for her. We are going to bring the border solutions that it needs so we can finally have security on the border, while at the same time making sure that we leave open the possibility and work for comprehensive immigration reform.